understand and empathize. We could learn to fill the world with love.
Hello, everyone. I think we should see you when you come into the live stream. So we're just waiting for people to enter the live stream. And I think so, Brian, I should have asked you, Brian, will we see the people in a panel who are in the live stream? We've got Jason coming in now. So just get comfortable. We'll just get started in a moment.
Hi, Les. No, you won't see anybody else. It's just going to be you two guys.
Oh, okay. So I won't know how many people are in the live stream.
No, you've got 10 at the moment. I can see. So that's
10 really, already.
That's good.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. So, good.
Sorry, guys. I will leave you to it.
We'll get started. So welcome, everyone, to this live stream, Sunday morning live stream. And we've got, as our special guest today, Terry Kelly. So before that, I did want to ask if you could kindly subscribe to the Humanist Australia YouTube channel, and that way you'll keep up to date with what events are coming up. And also, this is a Humanist Australia event. So Humanist Australia is run completely by volunteers, and we do ask for you to help in any way you can. Actually, we've got 4 ways that you can help. And those 4 ways, which include donation, joining as a member, subscribing to our e-news newsletter, and to help out or to subscribe, you can go to the humanistaustralia.org. That's humanistaustralia.org website, and just put in /support, humanistaustralia.org/support, and you'll see the 4 different ways you can get engaged with Humanist Australia. So today I'll be interviewing Terry Kelly. A little about what we're going to be talking about today. Terry is a child abuse survivor, and what we'll do is we'll explore Terry's battle to get justice for the abuse he suffered at the hands of a Marist brother while attending the Assumption College in Kilmore. And after many decades of silence, Terry spoke up to finally make the Catholic Church accountable for its actions and inactions. So a little about Terry. Terry grew up in a farming family in the country town of Euroa in Victoria, Australia. He taught English, economics and history in a secondary school before changing career to social work, as teachers often do. Terry recently retired after 42 years working in public hospitals, neurology, rehabilitation and aged care. He was also a committee member of the Australian Skeptics Victorian branch for over 20 years, including serving 7 years as president. Terry's memberships also include Humanist Victoria, the Rationalist Society of Australia, the Atheist Foundation of Australia, the Secular Party of Australia, which I think is now merged with the Fusion Party, and membership in the Royal Society of Victoria. So welcome, Terry.
Thanks, Les.
Now, let's start at the beginning. You grew up in a little country town. Can you say a little about your early formative years in your country, Victoria?
Yes, I grew up in Euroa, which is a town of about 3,000 people. It's one of those towns where the population hasn't changed at all in my lifetime, as far as I know. Some small towns are getting smaller, and some of the bigger towns, which are sort of regional centres, get bigger, but Euroa stayed exactly the same. I was a townie in that we lived in the centre of town. Like, I was actually directly across the road from the Catholic primary school that I went to, St John's Euroa. So it took me less than a minute to get to school, but our farm was outside the town, say a few different bits, 3 miles out and 6 miles out. And Dad grew crops, oats and wheat, and and had sheep for wool and fat lambs, and then got into beef cattle. So in holidays or on spare time, I'd do farm work, but I was never going to be a farmer. And partly because I had a bit of hay fever when I was a kid, used to go down to farms. But I used to love doing certain farm jobs. And when I was 11, I went off to boarding school, as a lot of kids in country towns did do. The kids went off to boarding school. Oddly, in Euroa, there was a history of the Catholic kids, instead of going to high school, they went up to St. Pat's Ballarat. And I was never quite sure why that was, because it was so much further to get from Euroa to Ballarat than it was to get from Euroa to Kilmore. So I went to Kilmore, which was less than an hour, and most of the Catholic kids and my cousins and stuff, they went to Ballarat. I think that was because Ballarat had girls' boarding schools as well. So the family would sort of do that, and there was a bit of a history. Both towns were incredibly cold. They had that in common. Yeah. But one of the things that attracted me and my parents to Assumption College, Kilmore, was the sport, particularly the football. That said, Ballarat also had a huge history of sporting success, particularly with football. So, yeah, I grew up in a country town. However, by the time I was 11, I'd virtually left, because I went back to Euroa in the holidays and worked on the farm and played sport for some of the junior sports teams. But most of my life from 11 to 17 was spent in Kilmore as a boarder at the college.
As a boarder. So were your parents particularly religious, Terry?
No. They went to church every Sunday, and they both came from Catholic backgrounds. However, they weren't rabidly fanatical Christian Catholics. They practiced the faith, and Dad was a member of the Knights of Malta, or so, some of those volunteer sort of things. But Mum was very. She was always a bit. I became a skeptic, and I got some of my skepticism from my mum. And after she died, which was in 2011, two of her closest friends came to me and said, she didn't really believe all that Catholic stuff.
Yeah.
It was more for Mum. It was a fashion parade, and it was a social thing, going to church and that sort of stuff. And she went through the motions. And when she was sort of sick at times, as she got older, they would come to the house and deliver communion to her, because she wasn't sort of up to going to church. But she wasn't a strong believer at all.
Do you think she believed in God, though, even though she might not have taken up on the rituals and the myths about the virgin birth and stuff? Do you think she believed in God?
I never actually asked her that. I'm starting to think now, no, she probably didn't.
Yeah.
That she took on some of the values, like, the Catholic Church talks about faith, hope, and charity, and the greatest of these is charity, sort of good living people, sort of kind, and they would have taken on some of the attitudes of the church, like anti-abortion, that sort of stuff. But I'm suspecting now that Mum didn't really believe in God. My dad did say at one stage, we can't be sure about God in the afterlife, we can just hope. So it was more of a Catholic in hope rather than a Catholic in deep faith, I guess.
But it sounds like there wasn't much religious talk in the household.
Not all that much, no. And we did have some relatives who were a bit more religious and a bit more fanatical, and Mum and Dad, Mum in particular, thought they were a bit nuts, and you didn't really want to hang around with them too much, or you didn't engage in conversations like that. And in fact, my Mum told me, or Mum and Dad, I think both told me, that my grandfather, when he was asked whether he was a Roman Catholic, he said, "No, I'm an Irish Catholic."
Uh,
So my great grandfather came out from Ireland, but my grandfather, there was a difference between Irish
yeah,
Catholics and Roman Catholics in their mind, and they were a little
right.
bit, they weren't part of the IRA or anything, but there was a division between my dad was very much into ecumenicism, if that's the right word. He thought the churches should all come together. If you're a Catholic, you could go to the Church of England and vice versa, and the
Right.
Methodists and the Presbyterians. They didn't really worry about those divisions, and I thought that was unfortunate when people fought and argue about those sort of things.
Mm. So you would come home on weekends while you were boarding in Kilmore. You would come home on weekends.
No, we didn't get weekends.
Yeah.
They do these days. Things have changed, I think, quite a bit. But we only got to come home to stay at holidays, Easter and the May holidays, September holidays, and the summer holidays. We got one free Sunday per month.
Yeah.
So we could go out with our family for the day on a Sunday, but you had to be back the same day. So you didn't go home on weekends. You stayed. And so for when there was events at the school or big sporting events and that sort of stuff, speech days, the parents had to come down. And that because a lot of the boarders came from all over the place, like New South Wales and even far away as New Guinea and that sort of stuff. So those boarders, it was a big deal going home in the holidays, and sometimes they would go with other families and that sort of stuff. But yeah, they didn't, on the free Sundays, they didn't see their parents very often. No, we didn't. We didn't go home on the weekends.
Yeah.
They do now, I think.
Yeah. Good. So there's progress there. So
And that was another reason. Sorry, that was another reason my parents thought Kilmore was a better option than Ballarat. It was less than an hour to get there,
Yeah. So at Assumption College, apart from the abuse, what was your impressions of staying there and the education, the people there at Assumption College?
I'm still good friends with a lot of people I went to school with. I'm not one of these people who is just locked into your school days and they're the only friends you have. And I've made a lot of friends in other walks of life, but I do regularly see particularly 4 or 5 of my friends from school. I see them regularly, and whenever we have events and if there's a reunion or something, I tend to go. And so there are also a couple of there's a couple of email groups where we get in touch. For example, an old friend of mine that I played footy with at school and uni, he died yesterday morning.
Sorry to hear that, Terry.
Yeah, it was very sad. He was a dentist in Herb Barlow, the father of Michael Barlow, the footballer who played for Fremantle, right? And Herb was a great footballer. He was a dentist in Shepparton, and he had a long illness and died yesterday. But there's an email group, so all of a sudden, 50 people knew that he'd died within an hour or two of him dying. So that kind of stuff, I think is quite good. But in terms of the education, we were force-fed, and a lot of us were taught by corporal punishment. Like, you were actually hit. Some of the brothers did this, not all, and some of the lay teachers. If you got poor marks in the English or French test, you might get hit. You were also taught by intimidation, like in Form 1, there were 63 kids. There's the old joke about full as a Catholic school. Well, we had 63 kids in Form 1, Year 7, and we were ranked from 1 to 63. And so I was in term 1, first year in Form 1, first term I came equal first in the class. But I kind of objected to the way, it's a little bit of the social justice thing I've continued as a social worker and stuff. The social justice thing, I just felt that the other kids in the class were unfairly treated, especially the kids that did poorly.
Mm.
You know, and some of these kids had dyslexia and all, you know, sort of stuff, and developmental delays and that sort of stuff. And they got a really hard time. So I actually, to some extent, an old friend of mine said, you used to do poorly on some of your tests on purpose, didn't you? I stopped being number one. I sort of dropped back to sort of number 6 or 8 or 10 throughout the year. And that was partly because, well, I didn't have to prove myself, and partly because I didn't want to stand out in that sense, to be one of the nerdy kids. I preferred to be known as one of the sporty kids. I was one of the sort of a in-between. I was a daggy kind of kid. I wasn't one of the cool kids, but I wasn't one of the completely nerdy, daggy kids either. I was somewhere in between. But I just thought that some of the treatment of the kids who didn't do well was a bit harsh. However, there were some teachers who didn't use corporal punishment. One of them is a guy who's quite famous. He became very well known as a football coach, Ray Carroll. People might have heard of him. He coached the first 18 football and the first 11 cricket. And he became sort of legendary in terms of his success of coaching the football team and producing league footballers and that sort of stuff. He was also a very good English teacher, and he hardly ever, rarely if ever, used corporal punishment. He had good control of the class, but he did use sarcasm. It bordered on verbal abuse sometimes, the way he put kids down. But even in year 8, Form 2, in order to sort of even fit in more with the other kids, I used to also at times purposely get into trouble. There was one kid who was a very slow learner. He was 14 in year 7. He got, we call them cuts, he got 100 cuts in one term.
Yeah.
And he counted them. And when he'd go out the front and get 6 of the best, he'd walk back to his desk and he would write them down. And one day that one of the teachers caught him writing down his cuts, and he gave him 6 more.
Yeah.
For counting them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I took on I got 100 in Form 2. I got 100 cuts in the year. But I think this also coincided with when my abuse started. That my scores in my subjects went down a little bit. My behaviour became a little bit more, not exactly rebellious, but a bit rebellious, because the person who actually did abuse me and who has pleaded guilty and gone to jail, Brother Jared, his name was Michael Rush. I mean, he's been to jail after the Royal Commission. He started grooming me, and I don't know how many others, but he started grooming me when I was 11 or 12, and doing some very inappropriate things, and other kids, the streetwise kids, noticed this as well.
Right. So it started off small. It started off small and then escalated, did it, Terry?
It did. Yeah, it did. Yeah. But the other, partly to answer your original question, what the school was like, for me, it was bearable because of the sport. And I was good at football and good at cricket. And so that was an important, there was things to look forward to and things to really enjoy. And we took the sport really seriously. So for me, the school wasn't as bad as it was for some other kids. If you weren't good at the school and you weren't good at sport and you weren't one of the cool kids, it was tough.
Yeah. So the picture I'm getting is it was a pretty harsh education environment, but more than that, the teachers there were not terribly empathetic kind of people to begin with.
No, a lot weren't. Some were. I did have some brilliant teachers. There was a brilliant maths teacher, Brother Timothy. He taught me in year 11. He was a fabulous physics and maths teacher. He also was a good religion teacher. I've got to say, religion was the most interesting subject in a way, because you got to discuss things and life. And some of the teachers didn't hammer religion down your throat. Like I actually, in my younger years, and because Catholics are aware of, the Catholic churches used to have retreats. where retreat priests would come in and they would hammer you with hell, and literally hellfire and damnation, and you'd be punished and you'd go to hell for eternity for committing one mortal sin. The mercy nuns, the story was, you could be really good all your life, perfectly behaved and never commit a mortal sin. But if you committed one mortal sin, like sex outside marriage or killing someone or stealing or visiting a brothel or something, and you walk across the road and get hit by a car and die, that's it. If you died with mortal sin on your soul, you went to hell for eternity. Whereas you could be, there were a lot of saints like this, you could be one of the worst living people, a sinner all the time, fornication, crime, murder, and that sort of stuff. But if you confessed and made an act of contrition on your deathbed, all those sins were washed away and you went to heaven for eternity after a bit of time in purgatory. But some of the religion teachers didn't go into that sort of stuff. So there was a real mixture of that kind of thing.
Oh, okay. So Brother Gerard entered your life. What subject was he teaching you when the abuse started, Terry?
He taught maths, and I think he also had the religion class.
Yeah.
A seed for my atheism was sown by one of the other bright kids in the class. I think it was in Form 1, Year 7 or Year 8. One of the kids who was bright, he actually came, Stephen Shin, he came from a very prominent horse trotting family, and his nephew is now Blake Shin, the champion jockey. But Stephen had a career in the trotting industry, but he's a really smart kid. But he asked Brother Jared. Brother Jared said, God can do absolutely everything. And Stephen said, can God do absolutely everything? And Brother Jared said, yes, he can do absolutely everything. And Stephen said, can God draw a square circle? There was silence. And Brother Jared said, well, no, God can't draw a square circle. So Stephen said, well, then God can't do absolutely everything then, can he? And the teacher said, no, actually, well, okay, God can't do absolutely everything. He can perform miracles or he can do this, but no, he can't do absolutely everything. I think, all right. That seed sort of sat there for a long time.
Brother Gerard started off slowly with the grooming. Can you describe a bit about how the escalation, how it escalates, how it starts and progresses?
Yeah.
And I do want to say, Terry, just divulge as much as you're comfortable with. So there's no compulsion to divulge more than what you're comfortable with.
And a lot of what I'm going to say was common knowledge because it happened in public. Just before I get on to the grooming bit, there was just in terms of the corporal punishment, and the brothers were under a lot of pressure. It was very hard work. It was, they would be teaching all day and then they'd be running sport and then be looking after dormitories and stuff. So it was a high pressure. And you got to, some of the kids blokes I went to school with, and even some of the bad kids who got into trouble, they say they don't have bad feelings towards them anymore because he said they were trying, that they were doing their best to try and help us. However, the pressure got to them at times, and there was one day where Brother Jared just lost it, and he not only gave a kid 6 of the best with a ruler, he gave 3 cuts on each hand. It was one of those rulers that had the metal thing sticking out, if you know what I mean, which was a sort of a thing you used in maths and algebra and geometry and that. So it wasn't just the wood, there was this metal thing sticking out, and he whacked this kid 3 times on each hand with this ruler. So, and his kid's fingers were bleeding. That was completely over the top. He completely lost it. So there was a degree of cruelty and frustration there. My brother Jared picked on me and a few other kids just by making us sort of pets, his favourites. And he would he would touch people, and not just me, lots of other kids, just come up and put his arm around you and stand too close to you and rub up against you and that kind of stuff. There was one time when I was about 11 or 12 and I was in the dormitory sick, and he came up to the dormitory when I wasn't alone. There was another kid down the road, and he started leaning over the bed, putting his face really close to my face and putting his hand down the sheets and that sort of stuff. It wasn't a gross kind of thing, but it was just, there was inappropriate touching at that time. And there was actually a witness to a degree. And the other kid who was in the room said, Jesus, it's a bit inappropriate. So Brother Jared had this reputation of being off, but he would sort of do it with some of the more innocent kids, some of the nicer looking kids, and he would sit kids on his knee, and I don't know how many other kids he got to. There was one kid who was a year ahead of me who was sort of a nice looking kid, came from a pub family, and anyway, after he left school, he got into all sorts of trouble with the law and alcoholism and stuff, and he died in his 30s. And I just wonder to this day, no evidence, but I just wonder what happened to him, because his life went right off the rails. But he was one of this guy's sort of favourites in a way. So the inappropriate touching and behaviour without it being all that gross, but this sort of built up over a year and a half. But but the other kids were the streetwise kids were alert to it.
So he was getting a reputation. Was the reputation also among fellow brothers and administrators as well? So what was happening?
This is what I don't know to this day, and it intrigues me what happened in other places, and Ballarat is another place where the most publicised abuse happened. What did the other people know? And there was the famous one in Ballarat, Ridsdale, I think, and the journalist Paul Bongiorno, I think he said he trained to be a priest for a while, and he said, I just didn't know what he was up to. He was doing, it's now well documented that he was lots of examples of him abusing kids over a number of years. Bongiorno said he didn't know. So but I just don't know. But there were things happening in public that were inappropriate that the other people would have seen. And I don't know why someone didn't say, look, that's a bit inappropriate what you're doing there, But so I really don't know to what extent. However, the following year, I was sort of more overtly abused by Brother Jared in November in 1967 when I was 13. He came to the dormitory when the lights were on, and he was behaving inappropriately towards me, and other kids could see what was happening. And then when the lights went out, he came back. But I even discussed it with a couple of the other kids around me, and one of them said, if he comes back after lights out, click your fingers twice. This is like comedic, really. Is it if he comes back and he tries anything on you, click your fingers twice, and I'll jump out of bed and I'll say, hands off the merchandise, mate. Like, we could see him coming. Anyway, I'm lying there on my stomach, clicking my fingers like mad. The kid didn't jump out of bed.
Yeah.
But
you think they were too afraid? You think that?
Yes.
They were too afraid.
Yes. But after he left, because I resisted him and he went away. And he told me, look, you haven't committed any sin. You don't have to go to confession or anything like this. I've done the wrong thing. He said that. And then he went away. And then me and the two of the other kids, we went downstairs and we went to the headmaster at about, 11 o'clock at night or something. And we got the headmaster out of bed. And I was trying to tell him what happened. And the words wouldn't come out. I just mentioned Brother Jared's name, and he told me basically what Brother Jared had done. And because Brother Jared was well known to be a child molester before he even went to that school, So as soon as I mentioned his name, the headmaster knew what, because he had done it before. Now, sort of it's sort of this sort of cutting to the end of the story, because I was contacted by a solicitor a few years ago from Right Side Legal, who they specialise in dealing with abuse cases, and they a certain amount of money was paid out through the church's system in the past, and I'd sort of thought about doing that, and I hadn't gone through with it. And I said, look, I'd heard of, I knew of another bloke I went to school with who was abused by a different person. He was abused by Father Des Gannon, who was quite famous as an abuser, and he got somewhere between $50,000 and $80,000, which I thought was an enormous amount of money. And the solicitor that called me said, that's nothing, we'll get a lot more than that, right? And so what, he did some scouting around, and he contacted the previous school, which was St. Pat's in Sale, and he found out that Brother Jared had abused a 12-year-old kid at St. Pat's in Sale, and that kid went to one of the senior kids. He didn't go to any of the teachers or the headmaster. He went to one of the senior kids who was in year 12 and told him what had happened. And that senior kid went to the headmaster and told the headmaster what the 12-year-old had said. So the headmaster's reaction and the school's reaction was to suspend the senior kid from school for 2 weeks. Right. Not only did they not address the issue, they not only did they not believe what the kid had said, they actually suspended the whistleblower, the kid who was sticking up for the younger kid. The solicitor found that out, and so he went really hard, because not only did they know, and there were like 5 other instances, I think, at that school. So there was this
of Brother Gerard.
Yes, of him abusing, so not only was it known, so there was this case a couple of years ago where it was decided that the church argued that their clergy weren't their employees, so therefore they weren't liable, and that was upheld. And that's actually been challenged again. That was the Ellis defence. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Or there was the Ellis defence. I'm not sure if this was something else, but this was this. The decision was only made a couple of years ago, where they said they're not our employees. We're not liable for their behaviour, and the court at that time agreed. But my lawyer said, okay, but we're going to go on the basis of negligence. So they knew that this guy was an abuser, and they put him into another school where kids were at risk. So our case was based on negligence, that they knew he was an abuser, and they didn't matter whether he was an employee or not, they put him in charge of kids. And so our case was won on the basis of negligence.
So you think, so it's definite that the previous school moved him on for that particular reason?
I'm not sure if that was the reason, but it coincided with that. Right. It was the year before, and I mean the clergy did move around a bit, so they might have had other reasons for moving him, but I suspect that was the reason.
Right.
And so what happened? So the headmaster virtually told me what had happened. The next morning, Brother Jared left our school and went to a Western Australian school. He was out of the school by 9:30 in the morning, and they sent him to a school in Western Australia. My parents, came down, the headmaster rang my parents. They came down to the school. Exam time was on. I was in the middle of a French exam, and I was called out of the exam to talk to my parents and the headmaster. But the headmaster told my parents that Brother Jared will never be teaching in a school in Victoria again. No discussion about criminal charges. No discussion about him being defrocked or taken out of it. Just that he was moved to another school in Western Australia.
So did your parents know about the abuse?
Yeah,
at this stage,
the headmaster rang my parents to tell them that I'd been abused, and they came down. They got straight in the car and came down, and he told them that they were moving Brother Jared on, and that he would never be teaching in Victoria again. So protecting at least I was believed, protecting the Victorian kids, but bugger the Western Australian kids.
Yeah,
I don't know what happened there,
isn't it?
But so having been told that he would never be in Victoria again, 3 years later, he was back in Wangaratta teaching at the Marist Brother school in Wangaratta. Wow. And I didn't know this, but I didn't know this until after my father had died. And this is one of the reasons I was so determined to go to the Royal Commission and stuff and do something about it. There was a school sports, Catholic College of Sports at Olympic Park, and I was in the athletics team, and I was running in the sports, and my parents were sitting in the stand at Olympic Park, and Brother Jared was sitting in the row behind my parents. I didn't know this, and Mum only told me this after my dad had died. Dad died in 1993, but she also told me how upset my father was. He didn't challenge Brother Jared. He was really upset, and it really bothered him. Yeah, and that made it was more. So my issues were not so much about how I was affected; it was about how my parents were affected and how other people were affected, but how also the church just covered things up and moved people around. So yeah, the headmaster did say to my parents, "You know what you can do if you want to," implying they could go to the police or the courts or something, but they never did.
They never did.
That was just but that was just the way things were done in those days.
Yeah,
people were moved around.
Yeah,
and of course the Catholic thing is if you're a sinner and you confess your sins and show contrition and promise never to do it again, that's the end of the story. The religion, the church, is more important than the law.
So after you left Assumption College, you finished your education, and with the abuse, did you think about the abuse in your later years before you were contacted by the solicitor? What impact did it have on you up to that point? Did you discuss it with others? How did it impact your own life?
A little bit. I was known as the kid who was abused by Brother Jared. One of the school bullies, I'm not sure it was within 1 or 2 days when the word got around. And this kid he was known to be a bully. And there's been a few reunions and stuff. And people have said, oh, there's so-and-so, he used to bully me at school. And even one of them, and they were still traumatized by it. And even one of them said, he was one of my best mates and he bullied me too, But, so we got into the refectory, the dining room in the morning. I'm not sure it was the next day or the day after. And he just reached over and leaned over my shoulder and said, oh, sir, you're one of Jared's poofters too.
Yeah.
And so Jared was known to be a poofter, and there were kids that he, targeted. So, but there was never any sort of direct evidence of it. So I was kind of known as one of Jared's poofters, but I was also known as the kid who stood up to him and wouldn't take it and went and told the headmaster and had him removed.
Yeah.
But people didn't talk to me about it all that much, except that some of my friends, it was the 20th of November, we used to have a little celebration every year on the 20th of November, and we used to run out of the dormitory at night and go and decorate the statue of Marcel Champagne and all sort of stuff. It was a weird kind of thing that the anniversary of my abuse by Brother Jared was celebrated every year for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
It was kind of weird, but it was, but yeah, anyway, So what it did give me was what I would call a healthy lack of respect for authority. Authority for its own sake.
Mm.
So authority figures had to earn my trust. You didn't trust them or believe them just because they were authority figures. And that stayed with me all my life. And it affected me. It affected me in my career. So this was what the legal case was around, the fact that this did stay with me throughout my life. Not just with that, but affecting my sleep. I never slept well after that.
Yeah.
Anxiety and this sort of stuff, which I hadn't necessarily associated those things. But the legal case, and I got quite a large sum, that they calculated my loss of earnings over the 50 years or so of my working life, because I never took up positions of authority in my work. I did have, I was president of 2 voluntary organisations, one of which was the Skeptics, but that was voluntary, and I was not a particularly authoritarian sort of a leader. But and actually, I mean, in fact, that Ray Carroll I was talking about before, the footy and cricket coach, he's written a lot of books about school, and in one of his books, he described me as a natural born leader because I was captain of the cricket team. And I was captain of the under-12 footy team that he coached. He said I was a natural leader. However, I never took on positions of authority. I didn't even apply for jobs. I didn't want to be an authoritarian figure. And in my last job, and this is partly where all this sort of came together, that I worked at the Royal Melbourne Hospital for the last 15 years in aged care. And the jobs, even in other jobs, if I didn't like the manager, or I thought the manager was a bit of a bully, I didn't apply for positions as a team leader or a more senior job than I was in, because I didn't want to work for those people. I didn't want to work on the side of a bully. And I didn't want to do that, because like in my previous job, the manager would tell the people under her to do stuff, and the people on the team all thought it was them doing it. I'm going, no, it's not them. They're just doing what the manager's telling them to do. So they're all sort of known as bull. It was a sort of culture of bullying to some extent. Yeah. But I never achieved positions of authority or power in my working life. So that did. So I would, in one way, call it a healthy disrespect for authority, but also, it affected my career. But other people say, good on you for working at the coalface all your working life,
So when the solicitor first contacted you, and this was at the end of the Royal Commission, or quite a fair bit after the Royal Commission had done their report?
A few years after the Royal Commission. Yeah, I went to when the Royal Commission came on, the emphasis was on the church hiding stuff. And so I went to the Royal Commission because, as far as I was concerned, my main issues were more about the way the church behaved rather than the perpetrators. In fact, it's come to, and look, in my social work career, I've dealt with a lot of victims and perpetrators of sexual abuse. I've dealt with that a lot. And I was, I remember I did a lot of counselling and therapy. I did family therapy. And one woman, for example, I'll give you 2 examples. One woman, she just happened to say in the course of a conversation about sleeping with the light on, and I just said, "Oh, why'd you sleep with the light on?" Boom, all this stuff about having been abused. And then one day I was at Benalla Hospital. I worked there for 10 years. And I was walking down the corridor, and this patient who was wearing a dressing gown just popped his head out of his room, and he pulled me over. He said, "Oh, g'day, mate. Are you the social worker?" He said, "Yeah, I need to talk to someone. I was sexually abused, and I've never spoken to her about anyone. Can you talk to me about it now?" And I did, so lots of I dealt with sex, and I actually I dealt with sexual and domestic violence perpetrators, a lot.
Mm.
But yeah, so going to the Royal Commission was more about the church moving stuff around. So it turned out then that then the police followed up with, and the Royal Commission and the police were fabulous. They were very supportive, and they offered me psychological debriefing and as much support as I needed. They're completely different to the church, where after this event where I was abused and the guy was removed, it was never mentioned again, ever, by any of the clergy. They offered me no ongoing support at all. Whereas, the Royal Commission was very good like that. But yeah, so the police got in touch with me and said, would you be willing to follow through with providing evidence for this? And then they told me that they had at least 5 other people who had been abused, allegedly, by this person. So when I saw that there were 6 of us, I said, yeah, let's go. And so they gathered the information, and he went to court. He turned up to court with his bag packed.
Oh, sorry. So we're talking about the court case with the Royal Commission, which
so the Royal Commission led to the police following up with me, and that's when we led to Brother Jerry being charged.
Right.
That followed on after the Royal Commission. So the police interviewed me, but they found out that there were several other people through the Royal Commission.
Right.
So when they found out that there were 5 or 6 victims of abuse by the same person, then the police contacted me, and then that's when we then he was charged, and he went to jail. He got a 2-year sentence.
Right. Yep. And for people,
and then that's after the. Yeah, go on. Sorry, go on, Liz. Yeah.
I was just going to say, for listeners who are not aware what we're talking about with the Royal Commission, this is the Royal Commission into Institutional Child Sex Abuse, started by Prime Minister Julia Gillard in 2012, 13. I can't remember, quite a while ago.
Yeah.
I think it went for 4 years from memory.
Yes, it
a long
did.
time,
yeah.
And they delivered a big report.
They did. Yeah. So the solicitor, I think he got my name through that, and he didn't know how to contact me, so he actually sent an email to the skeptics, the Victorian skeptics, and said, "Do you know how I can get in touch with Terry Kelly?" So that was how he contacted me, through the skeptics, and then it went on from there.
So when so before I ask about the solicitor, if anyone's got any questions that they'd like to ask Terry, stick them in the chat, and we can hopefully get to those in a little while. So when the solicitor first contacted you, Terry, what was going through your mind?
I suspected, if a solicitor's contacting me, I wonder whether this is what it's about. And this company, Right Side Legal, this is one of the things they specialise in. It's partly for the money. They make money out of it, and the more money that gets paid out in the judgment, the more money they make. They're entitled to take 10% of a judgment. They only charged me 8%, but that was still.
Why was that? Why was that?
Oh, it just. Because they weren't only about the money. They said the law says there's a maximum of 10% that can be charged. We can charge a bit less, and so they do this quite a lot. In fact, and I had to go to I had to be seen by 2 psychiatrists, one on the defence side and one on the prosecution side, and there was a whole sort of thing that went on, and there were hearings, so I had to speak at a hearing. But the member who conducted the hearing that I spoke at said, "Oh, you're in good hands here." So this particular lawyer, he's done a lot of this sort of stuff, and he was highly professional, and he'd won a lot of cases. So they were very confident that they would get a judgment in my favour.
Mm.
But that's yeah. So and I met with him once. I only met with him in person once, but we did a lot of phone conversations and a lot of email conversations and a lot of gathering evidence. And I actually had to provide evidence of my earnings as much as possible for the last 50 years. And they did a calculation of what other people with my qualifications might be earning per year, and they added all that up. And that's where they came to there, and the court agreed. But it was, we were looking at a particular figure. We're talking about six-figure figures here, multiple six figures. And the church made an offer, and they just rejected that. Then the church made another offer, which was pretty acceptable to me. But when the solicitor found out about this story I was telling you before, because he did some ringing around in the area, and when he found out about this example where the whistleblower was suspended from the school, and also the church withheld evidence too. That was one of the evidence bits of evidence. The church and their lawyers withheld evidence. And he said, no, bugger this. We're going to make them accountable. So there's an element of this particular legal firm and others being on a mission and wanting to hold the church accountable, as well as, it's a way for them to make money. And the other thing, which I hadn't realised, the Marist Brothers and other clerical organisations, people aren't joining the priesthood and the brotherhood anymore. There are a few. Most of the teachers in the schools are lay people. However, the schools, especially the Marist organisation, they're going gangbusters. The schools are getting bigger, and they've got more schools, and I think they're running good schools. I think they're being sort of successful in this, but there's a lot of wealth there. So this is what the lawyers know this, that there's a lot of wealth in these schools, and they don't want their name besmirched, and the church doesn't want to go. The church doesn't want to go to court, and that's, he said, that if we hit them hard, if we can't come to an agreement, we've got to go to court, and the church doesn't want this. They're protecting their reputation, and there is a fair bit of money there. They're not going to run out of money to pay these cases.
And was this 6 individual cases with the 6 abusers, or was it kind of like they grouped the 6 litigants together?
With the Royal Commission and the charges that sent him to jail, that was together. They put the 6 together. That was
together, right.
Yeah. I don't know how many other of the individuals have also made cases.
Right.
I don't know whether they're going to court individually. I presume some of them are. What I do know is that a guy I went to school with who was a couple of years younger than me, and his older brother was in my class. No one knew he'd been abused until 30 years after he'd left school. He was abused by Father Des Gannon, who was a priest at our school. He was the pastor at our school. Yeah. And and he said this affected his life a lot, it really messed up his life. But his family never knew until 30 years later. And his father never knew. His father died never knowing that this guy. So after my case was successfully conducted, I said, look, I don't know whether this guy did, because this guy, he did get one of the smaller payments through the church, through the Pell scheme.
Yeah.
I said, you just said anyway, they've been put in touch with each other.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's happened, but his abuse was much more prolonged and much more gross. Than mine.
So even if you got the $30,000 payout from the George Pell's Melbourne scheme, you could still take out later litigation.
Yeah, apparently that was my question. I didn't know whether you're entitled to, but the solicitors they're at least following up and talking with him about it. And I don't know how far they've gone with that, but he principally said, that might be possible.
Right. And how adversarial was the court process for you?
Not particularly. I didn't have to go to court. That was we got to within about 2 or 3 weeks of going to court, but the lawyer was pretty confident we could avoid it. All I had to do, I had to go to a hearing and I had to give a statement. I read out a statement, like I spoke for just a few minutes, and then I left. And then the lawyers discussed. The defence psychiatrist was a little bit sneaky. He was very nice. He was very nice to me, and he was very chummy and talking about my life and all this sort of stuff. And I realised later I'd been too chummy with him because his finding was, he's just a normal bloke. This hasn't affected his case, his life too much. He's got on with his life. He's had a successful life. He's fine. But the prosecution psychiatrist, and I had a 3-hour interview with him.
3 hour.
Yeah.
Wow.
The defence one was like an hour and a half. But the prosecution psychiatrist spent 3 hours with me. Yeah, he went in much harder.
Yeah. Went in much harder trying to ascertain the facts, or went in much harder trying to drill you, trying to pressure you to see whether you had any crack points?
No. He went in much harder towards the church. He advocated. He was much more adamant that this had affected my life.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah.
And then you got the payout. So I wanted to ask you what the legacy is of the court case. Has it impacted your life psychologically? We know it's impacted you financially, but what's been the psychological legacy of going to court?
I think the psychological legacy of going to court for any abuse victim is just kind of validation, verification, validation, that they're the person that did the wrong thing, not you, and that there's nothing mutual in it. Like I actually, and once through my work, I dealt with a guy one time who he went to jail for abusing two of his children, and he abused one of his daughters when she was about 5 or 6. And he said, it wasn't just me, she participated in this, and that kind of thinking is just abominable. There's that, and there's this sort of Lolita kind of thing, the book Lolita, where it's considered to be a love story, a romance. The girl was 12, it's just abuse, pure and simple. And so, so a court case and having someone found to be guilty, or even having them admit to it, is it's to some extent it's a bit of a relief to have that decided, I think. So for me, it was a bit of full circle, but there was a lot of, pleasure's not the right word, but justification in holding the church to account that this is what we're doing. And so me and the solicitors were in partnership for holding the church to account. It wasn't just about making the money. However, I was bordering on retiring. I was going to work for another 6 or 12 months, but when this came up, I said, oh, well, this just made retirement a lot easier. And what happened earlier this year, because I was a union delegate, a union rep at my job, and there was a whole lot of issues going on at my work about people working unpaid overtime, and the KPIs were hard to meet, and I used the term wage theft in a meeting with my manager and in front of everyone else, and so a complaint was made against me for raising my voice, pointing my finger and using the term wage theft. And it is wage theft. The police use the term wage theft, and even the childcare people now, they're using that term wage theft. It's a common industrial thing. Anyway, the complaint against me was substantiated. But my view was that people were being bullied, and that I was standing up to a bully. I was kind of a bit known for this in a way, standing up to bullies to some extent. And it's partly why I became a social worker and partly why I became a union delegate.
Yeah.
So this had been going on and there was a big whole restructure in aged care. Anyway, cut a long story short, back in February, when we'd been arguing about the unrealistic KPIs, and I was suggesting there's ways we can get this work done. There are shortcuts we can take, and we don't need to fill in the forms. The forms are too long. Forms are always too long. There's ways we can meet the KPIs if we do some streamlining. No, we've just got to do what you're told. So on a Monday, they were saying we had to do 2 assessments per day, and I was saying this is not possible in a long term. And anyway, they weren't sticking to that. And I did 2 assessments one day, and the next day in my diary only had 1 assessment. So I had the Tuesday afternoon free. And then I got back from doing an assessment. I had to drive for it, and I saw they put in another assessment on the Tuesday afternoon. And I sent an email to the senior team saying, look, I can't get this done. I can't complete this work in the time you've given me. I just can't do it. And I got a very curt email back saying, no, the KPI is 2 per day. You just have to do it. I said, no, and I walked out. I just walked out. So virtually, I walked out the next morning. I finished off my work. I came back for an hour. This happens so often in public health. I went to my doctor. I got 2 or 3 weeks personal leave. I took my long service leave and my annual leave, and I never went back.
Yeah.
But yeah, having that money in the background that hastened that to say, I don't have to put up with this.
Yeah.
So I left.
Yeah. So that's one really good outcome. So one last question, and the people who are in on the live stream, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat now, and we'll put them to Terry We're now running a little bit over time, but I want to give you the important opportunity to ask Terry any questions. So one last question, Terry. So after all of that, you're boarding in the Catholic school, having religious parents, the ordeal you've gone through. Where are you at today in your religious or non-religious beliefs, and where do you find meaning and purpose in your life?
Yeah, well, I'm an atheist, and I know there's often a lot of discussion about what's the difference between atheism and agnosticism, and some people think, oh, you're an atheist because you're convinced that you know there's no God. And so some people would call themselves agnostics because you can't prove whether there's a God or not. I sort of take the skeptical sort of scientific view that atheism means you don't believe. I might believe if there was good evidence for it, but there's no evidence. So it's not so much that I don't know, and it's not so much that I know there's no God. It's that I see no evidence for God, and there's no reason for God as an explanation when you've got, the history of science and evolution and all this kind of stuff. You often get back to this thing about how could you create a universe from nothing, and all sorts of philosophical sort of stuff. And Lawrence Krauss gave a talk to us one time where he said mathematically it was possible to create something from nothing. That's I don't know about that, but yeah, I call myself an atheist, not because I know there's no God, but because I have no reason to believe in a God. And also my atheism crept up on me too. After I left school, I went to Newman College. So they had church and mass at Newman College, and there was one Sunday morning I got up and I just didn't go to church, and I didn't feel bad. It was not an intellectual decision. I didn't feel guilty or bad or worried about not going to church, because when you're a kid, if you don't go to church on Sunday, it's a mortal sin, you go to hell. And that's literally what we were taught. Yeah. So when I got to the point, I'm not bothering. There was also a little bit of the atheism creeping in when I was at school, and some of the doubtful kind of kids, discussing the Garden of Eden you know, with our English literature teacher, one of the kids said, look, in the Garden of Eden, did the animals kill each other? And the teacher, and he was, you know, a brilliant academic mind, this guy, he was an English literature teacher. He said, oh, no, the animals in the Garden of Eden didn't eat each other. There was no killing. And the kid said, well, how did they eat? And he just said, God provided for them, my son. God provided for them. This is ridiculous. Yeah, so atheism sort of grew on me. And it was a liberating thing, not to have to worry about that kind of stuff. And there's more interesting explanations for how things are. So I think people attach their own meaning to things. I can't answer the question, what's the meaning of life? But it certainly doesn't come from religion.
So that leads into, if you don't think there's an afterlife and there's no God to worship to give you a purpose, and we're not working towards something eternal, then where do you get your life satisfaction from, Terry?
Well, yes, because if doing the right thing is a good thing to do, just because it's doing the right thing, you don't need the carrot of a reward in heaven to lead a meaningful life and to lead a good life and make the best of the life that we have. So, you know, and I know a lot of deeply religious people who are very cruel because they're very judgmental, and their God is a very judgmental God. And I find kind atheists to be much nicer people usually. You do get some, like, say, communism and Maoism and stuff, who sort of they're a bit anti-religious in that sense. So you can get sort of non-religious philosophies, if you like, or isms that can be harsh at times as well. But I don't even really search for meaning. It's just kind of make the most of your life and lead a good life. And, you know, so I was an atheist and I became a social worker because I believed in helping people and social justice.
So we've got one.
Yeah, go on.
Oh, sorry. No, go on, Terry.
No. Do the question.
So we've got one question in the chat, and I think we'll finish with this. Terry, I was just wondering if you have suffered any depression as a result of your ordeal.
Yes, I wonder about that. I've certainly probably more anxiety for one thing, and poor sleep. I wonder about my mood, whether I probably have experienced some low-level depression over a long period of time. There's also another body of thought that says that depression just indicates a good acceptance of reality and how things are. A little bit of low-level depression is probably a healthy thing. There's also been some studies that say in a workplace, having people that are a bit depressed and pessimistic is a good thing. If everyone's always bubbly and optimistic and happy all the time, shit happens. You need a bit of that sort of, so I wouldn't say I've been blissfully happy. When I've had things happen in my life, like relationship breakups and that kind of stuff, I've certainly suffered grief, which is different to depression. And I suspect that I've probably had a lowered mood or been more depressed than I probably realised at the time. The only other thing for me was that my abuse was never secret, or most of it wasn't secret, and I was sort of validated in a way. The horrific abuse that people suffer where it's been kept a secret and no one knew about it, and they've held this, that's incredibly hard to deal with. But I'd say a bit of low level depression and certainly anxiety about it. But certainly, and I always like to make the distinction between skepticism and cynicism. and I can lean into cynicism at times, whereas that's sort of automatically believing that something is bad without having the evidence, or a skepticism means you make your judgment after you've got the evidence. But I'm fairly cynical about the church. I've got good evidence for that. So, yeah.
Well, thank you, Terry, for sharing your story this morning. And for our listeners, please subscribe to the Humanist Australia YouTube channel and check out our support page on humanistaustralia.org/support. And we hope to see you at our next live stream. Bye.
Thanks very much, Les. Thank you.
Use your eyes, know yourself, realize, understand and empathize. We could learn to fill the world with love.